Alright folks, so in this video I'm just going to do a very basic introduction to setting up a page on InDesign. Now, obviously at the moment I'm recording this during the February half term, so we don't really know what's going to be on the exam paper yet. We probably know a few bits where we can make a few sort of like educated guesses, but for now these ones that I'm going to make until the exam paper gets released are going to be pretty universal, so it's the kind of thing that you can probably use for all of your, or whatever comes up on the exam paper. So today's going to be a really basic one, setting up a design on InDesign and explaining a few little bits and bobs when you've set up your work. So just a couple of little pointers before we crack on. I'm doing this on my computer at home, so my interface might look a little bit different to the interface that you've got at college, but it's not going to be massively different. And I'm also using the 2023 version of InDesign as well. I think at the moment we've got the 2022 version installed at TRC, but it's probably not going to be massively different, so just bear that in mind. So obviously in the context of the exam, we know that you're probably going to be needing to use InDesign to set up, to make whatever it is you've got to be asked to make. So let's crack on. So obviously, you know, I'm going to do this very basic. So, you know, some of this might seem a little bit sort of, what's the word, patronising a little bit, but I'm just going to start from scratch just so you've got everything that you need. So to start, I'm obviously going to click on New File. What you will then be greeted with is loads of different random presets that are probably going to be based on anything that you might have done in the past on InDesign. For now though, you can pretty much ignore all of this because what we want to focus on is these two sections at the top here where it says print or web. Now obviously at the moment we don't know what's going to be on the exam paper. Most of the things in the past have been web based, so for last year it was an e-magazine, the time before that I think it was an e-newspaper, but obviously what preset you will use here will depend on what it is you're being asked to make. If it's something that's going to be printed out, like a magazine or a poster or a leaflet, something like that, then you would use print as your preset. If you're using something like a e-magazine or an e-newspaper or anything that's going to be made for a digital platform, then you want to be using web. You don't really need to know about what the differences are between web and print, because what it'll do is it'll change some of the things like the colour settings, and a few other bits and bobs, but you don't need to worry so much about those. Just make sure you've got the right one chosen for whatever it is you're being asked to make. Now, with the dimensions, so I'm just going to choose print for now, just because I am. With the dimensions, that will depend on what it is you're being asked to make. Now, sometimes what the exam board will do is they will give you the dimensions that they want you to use, especially if it's something that's a little bit, something that has a lot of variables, like a poster or a leaflet or something like that. However, they might not. If it's something like a newspaper or a magazine that has a very standard set of dimensions, they won't give you the dimensions. But one thing I will say is, if they give you the dimensions, it's probably going to be in pixels. So make sure you change your unit of measurements to pixels there, and you can type in your measurements there. Because let's say, for example, I don't know, they give you 1000 by 1000 pixels, and you change this to 1000, but you accidentally have centimeters chosen, or millimeters, your canvas is going to be massive. So just make sure you've always got the right unit of measurement here. That's really important. Okay. You will have some presets here as well, so things like A4, A3, but a lot of this will, like I said, will depend on what it is you're being asked to make. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the dimensions because we'll cross the bridge when we come to it. Okay. Pages, obviously how many pages you need. It's pretty obvious, isn't it, really, to be honest. One thing I will say is that if the brief says that you've got to make something like a double page spread but not a front page, you will need 2 pages, right? But what that means is, if I was to press create now, you will see that I have 1 page there and 1 page there, which is no good if I want to make a double page spread. So let's just go close that and create a new one again. If you do have to do anything like a double page spread, choose to start on page 2. And that way, there you go, you'll get your page like that. Alright, but obviously, we'll cross the bridge when we come to it. So don't worry about that too much for now. That's just something to keep an eye out for. So, these bits are pretty straightforward. It will probably tell you what it wants, especially for your width, for your dimensions, sorry. These ones here, though, are a little bit more important. Your margins and your bleeds and slug lines, okay? So, I'm just going to quickly talk through why these are really important, okay? I mean, we've done a lot of this already before when we did magazines, but it's just something that I think we should spend a bit of time looking at again. So, your columns, obviously, depends on what it is you're being asked to make. If you're making a magazine, you might want something like 2 or 3 columns maybe. Let's just go with 3 for now. And my column gutter, the gutter, don't forget, means the width between your columns. So I'm just going to put that down to 4mm, but again, it can be whatever you want it to be. Anything probably over 5mm is probably a bit too big, but it all depends on your own style. Now your margins and your bleeds are what's really important. So your margins, as you should know if you've done anything on written paper before, is the gap between the edge of the paper and any objects that you've got. But I'll show you again what that looks like on your actual InDesign canvas when I've finished. And your bleeds and slugs are basically your overlap. So I'm going to set just to show you an example, I'm going to set my margins to 12mm, and I'm also going to change my slugs and my bleeds to 12mm as well. You can see there as well that I increased the top to 12mm. All these ones increased at the same time. This one doesn't, because I've not got this chain link connected. If I click on that chain link, then I can start increasing them all together. So I'm going to increase these to 12. Again, these can be whatever you want to be. It's completely up to you. Standard is probably between 10 and 12mm, give or take, but it's perfectly up to you. And then when I'm finished, I'm happy with my settings. Yep, that looks fine for now. I'm going to press create, and then my canvas should load up here. So you can see here, I've got my gutter between my columns. Nice here, and 2 more there as well. I've got my margins around the edge here. And then I've got my margins around the edge here. And then I've got my bleed around the outside here. Now, why do we need these margins and bleeds? Basically, it comes down to organisation. So we can make sure that our product, whatever it is we've been asked to make, looks neat and tidy and organised. Now, as a general rule of thumb, there are a couple of things you've got to consider when you're using your bleeds and your margins. Now, this is obviously very, very individual to the individual person, but the general sort of rule I tend to go with is that no text at all should cross that line there. Alright? Maybe things like page numbers, they're okay to cross it, but for things like, let's say I've got my headline here, right? I'm going to let's get a headline in there, let's call it very creatively headline. Give it bigger. I will do some stuff on how to use text a little bit later on. But if I've got this text on here, this text should not cross my margin line there. Now this margin line, it's not as much of an issue for digital magazines, but it basically acts as a safety line for printed products, because sometimes you get a little bit of trim where things don't print properly, and if any text was there, say for example, and this bit got cut off by the printer, then you won't be able to read it. So the margins act as a safety line. Now, the bleed around the outside is for images or background textures. Now again, the basic rule here is that images can go off the edge of your page, but again, they shouldn't go any further than that bleed. Okay, and again, that just acts as a little bit of a safety net, just in case any of the printing doesn't work properly. But that's for images. So if you have like a nice background texture, in fact, let me draw a box that can be used as a background text. Let's say I want this box filled with a really unpleasant pink, like that, because I really hate the people who are going to be reading my magazine or whatever it is. This is my background texture. If I have my background texture set to the edge of my page here, that's fine, but you're in the risk that something might happen and something might, you might see gaps around the edge. Whereas if I just make it a little bit bigger and just overlap the edge of my page a little bit, not too much so it goes over the bleed, but I just overlap it there, That way I know that that pink, that horrible, shocking pink, is always going to be around the edge of my page. Alright, so that's why we use margins and bleeds. Really straightforward, really easy, really simple to understand, but it's just something that people don't often consider when they're setting up their pages on InDesign. So just remember that when you just set up your pages. So I'll show you again just as a reminder. Remember your dimensions. Remember to make sure that you've got the right unit of measurement chosen, because sometimes if you have the wrong unit of measurement chosen, it means that your canvas size could be really, really small, or it could be really massively big, which means that things like all your pictures will become pixelated, and it means your file size will be massive, so the InDesign will run really, really slow. Remember your margins and your bleeds as well. Remember what they're there for. But other than that, really, remember to make sure you've got print or web chosen. Okay. So other than that, there's not really much else that you need to be aware of. One of the things I will say as well, just because it's reminding me right now, is that if you're doing something for web, the default unit of measurements is pixels, because obviously it's a computer. You'll be making something that's for a screen, and screens use pixels. So all the presets will change to pixels if you are doing something for web. But it's not a massive thing, just bear that in mind. Alright, that's pretty much it for this first video. I will be doing a lot more, so make sure you're watching all of those, just as a bit of a recap. And I will try and make them as starting from scratch as I possibly can. But yeah, that's it. I'll catch you next time.